I guess one practice before 8 days, just kind of overview how you think the defense is done.
You know, there's been some really positive things. We were so much further ahead this year than last year, as we should be, on scheme and other things like that. The frustrating part of it is we've had a lot more nagging injuries this year than we did last year, and we've had some guys that we really felt we needed to be a little bit cautious with in certain drills. And the combination of the two, I don't think we've had nearly as physical and probably as full a spring as we would have liked to. Some of that's a good thing, though. You know, when you got players that you trust and you believe they know what they're doing, and you don't have to rep them in certain situations because you want to be smart, that's a good thing. But we had probably about a dozen guys that either missed all of spring practice or a great portion of spring practice, and they were guys that really had a legitimate shot to jump into the two deep battle. And that's frustrating when you don't get to work with those guys, and I know it's frustrating for them too. That would be the only negative I would say about our spring, is that there was several guys that really needed those opportunities that couldn't get in there.
Ellis, what are you hoping to get out of the 8-day game on Saturday?
Well, we want it to be a good scrimmage, but we're going to be a little bit prudent about certain players playing too many snaps. Again, last year we were so deep, we were able to have a pretty good scrimmage out there, even with a few guys missing. This year we got a lot more missing. We don't know the final on it yet. There were a couple of guys, actually got a couple of guys like TJ. He got back today. Be curious to see how he felt with that hamstring. But there are a couple in that situation who have missed 2 or 3 weeks, and they will be able to go Saturday, I hope. But there are several guys who will not be able to go full speed because of injuries. But I still think it's going to be a good day. I think we'll have enough guys out there. We'll have some good full speed work. We really have not had a full live scrimmage in about two full weeks.
Who do you expect to kind of take it easy on?
I'm sorry?
Who are you expecting to take it easy on
Well, they're just some of the older players. You know, I don't want to go through the whole list because Coach hadn't made the final decision yet. But when you've got a player like Reese Dismukes who started for 3 years and going to be a 4-year starter, and we don't have proven depth behind him, you got to be smart. Because if we lost him to a serious injury Saturday, he wouldn't be back for the season. So there's some issues like that. I think the coach has got to make some very prudent decisions.
Talk about Kamaya here. I know he's had to miss some practice. Is he going to be back sometime soon?
I don't know, but you know, he's a great example of what I was talking about earlier. He was on that edge of being able to fight for one of those 2 deep spots and missed quite a bit of practice. So I don't know if he'll be ready to go yet or not.
Who's behind Cass and Chris at linebacker? How's it kind of stack up?
Well, frankly, Cass haven't had a very good spring. He bruised his tailbone really bad after about 3 practices. And his middle 6 to 7 practices were 3 or 4 of them he didn't practice. And the other 3 or 4, he was never full speed. Now, the last 2, he's had some good practices, and I think he's going to be fine. He needed a spring. He needed a good spring. I know he was a starter last year, but he's still a relatively young linebacker. I wish he would have had more work. I pulled some off of Chris Frost as the spring wore on in order to give him to Kahari Harding, who we moved from boundary safety about 5 practices ago. But to answer your question right now, it's Kenny Flowers, Cameron Toney, and Kahari Harding. And all of them have had a pretty good spring. I'm really happy about Kahari's progress because when you move a player like that, and I don't think he's ever truly played inside linebacker, played down near the box quite a bit, but when you move a player like that, you never know how it's going to work out. Usually in the first couple of practices, you can tell whether it's going to fit or not. He's had a really good spring. I'm very optimistic about what he's going to be able to do for us next year.
Ellis, that said, Casanova was learning the middle position this spring. When he's not on the field for 2 or 3 practices, and the first 2 you don't place a high value on because there's not in pads, how much of this missed time is going to cost him an opportunity to learn that position?
It was a big hamper. You know, it set him back quite a bit. The first 3 practices, he really moved into it really easily. When I first got here, I thought he was the Mike linebacker, but he wouldn't talk. Didn't communicate well at the line of scrimmage. things of that nature. Chris was a little bit quicker. Jake had a lot more experience, and that was the primary reason that they ended up where they did. There's not a lot of difference in the prototype Mike and Will in this system. They've got to do some very similar things. But his transition to that position was really effortless. It was easy. I just wish he hadn't missed so much time, because I think fundamentally he hasn't improved. And he's still, like I said, a relatively inexperienced linebacker who would have gotten a lot better with spring. But the Mike Will exchange between him and Frost has gone very well.
I know you talked in the past about making sure you have defense that can pretty much play against anybody. How much, in your opinion, over the years has just versatility on defense, players being able to be versatile in pass coverage, and come up and stop the run as well, how much has that kind of evolved and kind of become more and more important over the years?
You mean in general in football? Yeah. It's very important. The game has become more spread out on all levels, and quarterbacks throw the ball better than they used to because they're learning how to throw it at a younger age. High schools are teaching very complicated and very well polished passing games, and kids are coming to college as both receivers and quarterbacks, and for that matter, pass protection. But they're coming to the college level really a lot better than they ever were 15, 25 years ago at doing those things. So it's a different style of football now with most teams. On the other hand, you know, still if you're going to win a championship at Auburn, you're probably going to have to go through Georgia, LSU, and Alabama, and they're all power football teams. They're not spread. So it's very difficult, you know, from game to game. Sometimes it changes quite a bit. But even those teams, they can spread the field. They all throw the ball extremely well, and they have great receivers. And it's just, you know, it's hard to play with the old prototype linebacker that could stop the run and was very much of a liability in coverage. They got to be able to run these days. And one of the other things that we put a huge premium on in trying to recruit is length, not just height, but arm span, those type things, because there's so much is done now in pass coverage and blitzing and other things where arm length and overall length is such a big factor.
Ellis, can you talk about how Carl Lawson's done this spring, plus with Gabe and Montravis out of the end? How are they doing?
Carl's had a great spring. Our objective with Carl, we know he's a good player, and he made some really dynamic plays last year as a true freshman. Well, what our objective with him this spring was to make him a good overall every down player, better at the point of attack, better at learning some of our twist schemes and maybe some of our blitzes and other things and adjustments. And he's had a really good spring. He's a much more complete player than he was, and still has that ability to bring the dynamic plays on third down too. Elijah pulled a groin, I think, about 20 minutes into the first practice. He did get back 2 practices ago. He's had a couple of good practices, but he was one of the ones I mentioned earlier. Spring practice could have been so beneficial to him, and he had a very, very average spring practice because of the misses and the practices he couldn't go. Who else did you ask about?
About Montravis and Gabe.
Montravis, very unselfishly, he and Gabe had to move outside to defensive end. We were out of bodies. It was something that we thought about earlier in his career anyhow because he's so athletic. But he's done a heck of a job out at defensive end. So did Gabe. It's given us an idea also in looking toward next fall. We'll have a big package that we can play 4 bigger linemen in certain situations. They got a lot of work at that, and I think that will be something we will utilize against some of those teams I was talking about. When you got a 295-pound end and a 200, maybe a 300-pound end, and both of them run under 5 flat, one of them runs about 4.7, I think we can really help ourselves in some of those power football teams we play and still stay within our base system.
Ellis,
They did a good job, and sort of unselfishly, they've been double training all spring.
Ellis, when you look back at last spring, what was the one thing you hoped would ring true going into the fall that did, and then what do you hope rings true this spring going into next fall?
I think the biggest thing probably is we thought we had a lot of just good, solid football players on the field in spring. We didn't see the big-time dynamic playmakers. But we thought we identified a few as the spring wound down, and Chris Davis and D Ford and some of those guys did turn out to do those things for us. But the thing that we saw in the spring was a deep football team. And if you go back to last fall, we played a lot of people. At times, we didn't play consistently. Maybe that contributed to it. But we played really well for the most part in the fourth quarter in about every game. We made some really big plays. And I think it's because we played a lot of guys, especially up front.
What do you see this spring that you kind of hope?
Well, this spring, we're just, right now, we're just making a lot of plays that we didn't make last spring. Familiarity within the system, making quicker and better adjustments on formations and playing better within the system with each other. We're just a lot better. We're a lot further along than we were this time last year. And if the injury bug doesn't jump up and grab us, I think depth is going to be developed. We're feeling a lot better about our safeties now and the depth there. We got some incoming help in the front, with Elijah and L.O. Darius not practicing this spring. It looked extremely thin out there, but they'll be back. Plus, we got 2 junior college players coming in. So I think we'll be fine. Maybe not quite as deep as last year, but I think the quality of depth may be better.
Ellis, do you feel you have a good grasp on the holes you needed to fill and who's going to do it? I know Cass was limited. You were working in the secondary to figure out who's going to place Chris Davis, and it Holsey wasn't able to do much this spring. But do you feel you have a decent grasp of who's going to fill those roles?
Yep, we still feel like that with Holsey coming back, that we've still got a wild card. We feel fine about the guys that went this spring, but in the back of your mind, you have to feel like Holsey was a legitimate starter, and whose job is he going to take? Because the 4 that finished the spring, Jonesy and Mincy and Whitehead and Moncrief, all had good springs. And then Rudy, Jonathan Ford, he and some of the other guys made great progress, and we've got a lot of confidence in them right now. All that being said, I just got to believe that Josh Holsey will come back and probably going to get in the fight for a starting job. Is it going to be the boundary safety? Is it going to be the boundary corner? Where are we going to need him the most? So we've got some question marks, but they're not the type of question marks where we're not sure who can do this. It's more of who's going to win that battle and who's going to be that #1 guy and who's going to be the #2 guy.
What would you say the biggest challenge you faced this spring so far?
Probably just trying to make progress with so many guys out, and I think we have. It was sometimes we felt like we were treading water as an entire unit. But when some of those guys were out, from a positive standpoint, it gave some other individuals a chance to get better. But overall, it was sort of a herky-jerky spring as far as really improving as a total picture and as a unit, because every other day there was somebody missing the key element of your defense. So I don't know how many days we actually had the best 11 out there working together.
Ellis, has anybody stepped up behind Carl Lawson as a pass rusher, and is that a concern for you going forward?
Montravis really looked good out there as a pass rusher at times, and I don't know if that'll be a permanent consideration, but he's certainly athletic enough to play out there. May not have the luxury of moving him out there. We felt like Elijah would be that guy, and Ladarius Owens obviously has ability. He did some last year. He showed some bright spots last year, and both of them missing so much practice time. I can't say that we really found who is the other guy on the other side. I think it's still a good battle going on for that.
How about Chase? How's he doing out there?
He's done okay. He's well behind those guys I mentioned, but he's done a pretty good job just learning the system.
What have you seen from Trevon making that transition to the other side of the ball this year?
I think he's at home. I think it's a very natural position for him. He's still learning a lot of the nuances that you got to be able to do to play corner. He'll get beat on the back shoulder fade occasionally because he'll get on top of a receiver, and some of the little technical aspects that he'll begin to polish up. Very aggressive, good tackler, has played press man technique pretty well. Some of the things that you hope they'll do naturally, he's done those. And sometimes you move a guy over and he won't tackle. He'll run into somebody, but he doesn't really want to. But he's been very aggressive and as a tackler and his coverage technique and all that. So it's just a matter of getting polished. And we feel like he's going to be a huge contributor to us.
I was going to say, what do you want to see from him during this summer to make that next step to maybe be in a 2-deep consideration?
He could really improve on a lot of those things I mentioned, his man coverage technique. They'll do a lot of one-on-one work over the summer. and he can do a lot of good stuff, learning better things with his hands, his footwork, his eyes, getting in phase with the receiver better and able to play the ball better. A lot of those things can improve. Obviously, tackling will have to wait. You know, we can't do any of that in the summer. We do have a new rule. They'll allow the coaches about 6 hours, I think, total, or some portion of the workouts. We can physically be out there instructing them, but it's more along the conditioning and agility work instead of no ball, no football, so we won't be able to work on a scheme or anything. But that's at least a step in the right direction, so we can talk to them and work with them on things like that.
Couple more?
Ellis, I want to ask you about Jonathan Jones. You mentioned him as one of the 4 guys back there. What kind of spring has he had?
Had a good spring. You know, I think right now he's penciled in, and I think we still got a battle. You mentioned Trevon Reed, Cameron Melton's had a good spring. Jones is ahead of him a little bit right now from an experience standpoint. Still got Josh Holsey waiting to come back. We could have let him practice this spring, but we chose to be very cautious. If we're deeper at safety, you know, Holsey could go to corner. If Holsey goes to boundary corner, Mincy could go back to field corner. There's a lot of moving parts back there, but at least we feel good right now that we've got answers. It's just where do we put them. Coming into spring, we were trying to find who could be the answers. And so we feel a lot better about it right now.
Ellis, I've got a big picture question for you. Chris said a couple weeks ago that a lot of times when you guys go to the line, the eventual play calls based on the formation. How much has that changed the way you teach the defense and, you know, the defense making their play call once the offense comes out, that kind of thing?
It's, you know, we do it a lot more now than we used to because people are so varied with the formations with the same personnel. So what he's probably saying is we'll have a call, and then we're a field alignment, but we're formation adjusted. So we send the defense out there not knowing where the offense is going to align. We just know who's on the field. We know where the ball is. We know what time it is. You know which hash mark. You don't know what formation they're going to line up in. You don't know what play they're going to run. So a lot of our defenses are defenses that are actually end up, you're playing, the final call will actually be based on the way the offense is lined up. So they have to obviously make some of those calls and decisions on line of scrimmage.
Ellis, is there an update with Tyler Nero's status of the program?
I'm sorry.
Is there an update on Tyler Nero's status of the program?
You know, I don't know what that is. I'm sure there is, but I don't know enough about it to tell you.
All right.
I was just going to say, last year you guys had a record crowd May Day, national television. Is there any more hype surrounding this game coming up this weekend, or is it kind of business as usual? Are you guys planning on changing up the game plan any?
Well, we're trying to put on the same show we did last year, and we certainly hope it'll be the same crowd. You have to remember there was a lot of emotional aspects involved with Toomer's Corner. And I think probably a great percentage of the folks that came in that weekend, it was as much about that as anything. But the tremendous support they showed, our football team certainly recognized it, realized it, and it meant a lot to them. So we're still hopeful, and we think we'll have a great crowd. Whether it's exactly the same crowd or not, I don't know. But somebody told me that there are some, I think you can get your tickets ahead of time, but as of right now, they said it's way ahead of where it was the spring after the national championship game, so which is great. Maybe not quite as big as last year because I do think the events and the ceremonies at Toomer's Corner had a big effect on that.
All right.